Florida fishermen had to stop using this technique, not because it was illegal per se, but because it worked so well that authorities had to intervene. Today you'll see what they were doing on the banks of the state's canals and lakes that caused panic among fisheries managers at the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. It costs less than $3 to prepare. Old-time fishermen on the banks have been using this for decades before any regulations existed. And when you understand how it works, you'll understand why the fishing industry never taught you this. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any secrets the industry tries to hide. There's a lake in Kissimmee, in central Florida. A dirt shore, a muddy bottom, and 35-degree heat that cooks the water from morning onwards. Two fishermen arrived early on a Thursday in September, before the sun really got hot. Same lake, same morning, same dirt shore, less than 30 meters from each other, almost side by side. The first fisherman brought the complete kit from the store. Vacuum-packed Californian earthworms, the $20 box, imported fluorocarbon leaders, a bait casting reel that cost $300, 4-pound line that he switched to 2 weeks ago because he saw an influencer recommend it online, and 3 different types of artificial lures. One scented rubber lure, the kind they spray and guarantee the fish won't let go. It cost $14 each. He had 4. Well-equipped, confident. The second fisherman arrived with a grocery bag, a 5-liter bucket with a lid, and a mixture his grandfather had taught him when he was 8 years old back in Tennessee, before moving to Florida. A simple rod, 8-pound line without a special leader, a size 4 hook that cost pennies. Basic equipment from any $2 store. 4 hours later, the guy with the bag had 22 fish in his net. Largemouth bass, channel catfish, blue tilapia, and even a peacock bass that wasn't expected there, an invasive species that arrived in South Florida and spread through the lakes and canals. 22 fish in 4 hours. From the shore, without a boat, without sonar, without special equipment. The other fisherman? 3 fish. He almost lost one because the brand-new fluorocarbon line came undone at the knot. He also broke the tip of his rod trying to cast that rubber lure, which was too heavy for his equipment. Same bait? No. Same location? Yes. Same water? Same heat? Same time. The only difference was what the second fisherman put in the water before setting up his rod. And that's what you're going to learn today. But not just what to put in. You'll understand why, the science behind it, the right way to use it, and the mistakes most people make even when they know the technique. But before we continue, I need to tell you something. All this talk about what goes into the water before the bait is only one piece of the puzzle. What makes a consistent fisherman isn't a secret recipe. It's the ability to read the environment and make the right decisions at the right time. Reading the shoreline, the depth, the current, the fish's behavior. That's what separates those who always fish from those who sometimes get lucky. I've compiled all of this in the ebook High-Level Fishing, The Water Game. There you'll find practical freshwater and saltwater reading, how to identify productive zones in seconds, not hours of trial and error. Structure, where the fish really are, and why you're probably casting far from the school without knowing it. Current, tide, and water flow, the invisible engine that controls everything in fishing and that most fishermen completely ignore. Positioning and angle of attack, the detail that decides more than any expensive lure or imported rod. Fish behavior patterns, how to predict where they'll be before casting your line. Real-time decision-making, stop trying and start deciding based on what the water shows you. And the mindset of a high-level fisherman, What differentiates those who fish well from those who depend on luck every time? All in one place, no fluff, no store talk to sell products. The link is in the description. Now, what was that fisherman from Kissimmee throwing into the water before the bait? Ready? Fermented corn. Real corn. The kind you buy at the supermarket. The canned kind that costs $1 or so. But it's not just any corn. It's corn that has undergone a specific controlled fermentation process, transforming an ordinary grain into an attraction machine that works within a radius of up to 200 meters in still water and much further in flowing water. Does it seem too simple? That's the point. The old fishermen on the banks of the rivers and lakes of Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, they knew that the simplest things work best. They didn't need a laboratory. They needed time, patience, and the knowledge passed down from father to son like a family recipe, not an off-the-shelf product. In the drainage channels of South Florida, especially in the flooded inland areas, Cuban fishermen who arrived decades ago brought this practice as a cultural heritage. Fermented corn in a plastic bucket, left in the sun for 3 days before any serious fishing trip. On the shores of Lake Okeechobee, old catfish fishermen from the interior of the state used variations of this technique for over 50 years. In Louisiana, in the shallow bayous where the bottom is muddy and the water is the color of tannin-rich black tea, local fishermen called it fertilizing the spot, preparing the environment before presenting the bait. It was passed down within the family. It didn't leave the house. It didn't become a store product. And that's exactly why, when the FWC, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, began monitoring certain protected areas in the state, especially within state parks and wildlife management areas, they found a curious pattern. Certain banks in specific bodies of water concentrated fish disproportionately. When they investigated, they found fishermen using ground baiting techniques, conditioning the spot with attractants before fishing. In several protected areas of the state, the practice has been formally restricted. Not because corn is toxic, it isn't, but because it created such concentrated fishing pressure that it compromised local stocks of native species. This restriction exists and is documented in the FWC regulations for specific conservation areas. You can check it now on their website. The ban is real. And it's real for a very simple reason. This technique works too well to be allowed anywhere without control. Now, I'm going to explain exactly why it works. And not in a generic way. I'm going to show you the precise biological mechanism that occurs in the fish's sensory system when this corn enters the water. The olfactory system of fish is structurally different from ours and far more sensitive than most people imagine. What we call the nose of a fish are the olfactory nostrils, 2 openings on each side of the head that continuously channel water through chambers filled with specialized olfactory epithelium. This epithelium is composed of receptor cells that respond to specific chemical molecules dissolved in the water. The sensitivity is incredible. Fish like the largemouth bass and the channel catfish detect certain substances in concentrations of parts per trillion. Not per million, per trillion. To give you a reference, that's equivalent to detecting a single drop of a substance dissolved in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools full of water. When corn undergoes the proper fermentation process, it releases a complex mixture of chemical compounds that activate these olfactory receptors in an almost irresistible way. The initial aerobic fermentation, which takes place in the first 12 hours, produces carbon dioxide and small amounts of ethyl alcohol. After 24 hours, when the oxygen inside the bucket decreases, anaerobic fermentation begins, the most important stage. In this phase, lactic acid bacteria convert the sugars in the corn into lactic acid. At the same time, butyric acid bacteria produce butyrates, compounds that fish strongly associate with decaying organic matter at the bottom of bodies of water. And acetogenic bacteria produce acetic acid. It is this mixture of lactic acid, butyric acid, and acetic acid that creates the chemical profile that fish detect. Why this specific profile? Because it's the same food that invertebrates, aquatic larvae, and decaying vegetation naturally release at the bottom of lakes and rivers. The fish's brain doesn't distinguish between the natural source and the fermented corn. It simply receives the signal: available, established, safe food. Not as a trap, as real food. But there's another mechanism that most people don't consider. Actively fermenting corn releases microscopic bubbles of carbon dioxide and methane, gases produced by bacterial metabolism. These bubbles rise through the water column, creating microdisturbances that fish detect via their lateral line. The lateral line is a system of mechanical sensors that runs along the fish's body from head to tail, composed of hair cells that detect variations in pressure and movement in the water with extraordinary precision. When the fermenting corn is at the bottom, the bubbles create a continuous mechanical signal that complements the chemical signal from the sense of smell. Two different sensory channels are activated simultaneously with the same message. Food is available at that point. This combined effect is what creates the concentration of fish that seems impossible to an outsider looking without understanding the mechanism. Now, the step-by-step preparation. Pay attention to the details. This is where most people go wrong. It seems simple, and it is simple, but there are specific points that make a huge difference in the final result. You will need a can of corn, 425 grams, the common supermarket kind, costing less than $1.50. A bucket or plastic container with a lid, with a capacity of 1 to 2 liters. 2 tablets of dry yeast, the kind that comes in sachets for bread, costing less than 50 cents at the supermarket. A heaping tablespoon of brown sugar, half a teaspoon of coarse salt, warm water, around 28 to 32 degrees Celsius, not hot, which kills the yeast, nor cold, which slows down the process too much. The process. You open the can of corn and pour it into the plastic bucket with all the liquid from the can. Don't throw that liquid away. It's already full of starch and sugars that will feed the bacteria in the first few hours. Add the brown sugar and the 2 sachets of yeast. Stir well for about 2 minutes until everything is dissolved. Dissolving the yeast is the most critical point. Poorly dissolved yeast will ferment unevenly, and the result will be inconsistent from one batch to another. Add the salt and stir for another minute. The salt will regulate the speed of fermentation. Without it, the process can go too fast and produce less appealing compounds. Fill with warm water until the corn is submerged with at least 3 fingers of liquid above the kernels. Close the bucket, but not tightly. The fermentation gas needs to escape. If it's blocked, the bucket may pressurize, or fermentation will stop due to lack of gas escape. A simple solution. Leave the lid slightly ajar on one side, just enough for the gas to escape without letting insects in. Or pierce a small hole in the lid with a thick toothpick. Ideal environment. A constant temperature between 28 and 33 degrees Celsius. Indoors, in a warm place, away from air conditioning, works very well. Direct sunlight for more than 2 hours a day can overheat and kill some of the beneficial bacteria. Avoid placing it in the yard in direct sunlight all day. A cupboard or warm corner of the kitchen is perfect. The ideal fermentation time. 48 hours is the minimum to reach peak production of attractive compounds. 72 hours is the ideal point in most warm climates like Florida. After 96 hours, quality begins to decline, the attractive compounds degrade, and others emerge that may be repellent to some species. How to identify the right point? When you open the bucket, the smell will be sour. slightly alcoholic, similar to bread yeast mixed with mild vinegar. The liquid will be cloudy, whitish, or slightly yellowish. The grains will be a little more swollen and softer in the shell than when you put them in the can. If the smell is very strong, rotten, with heavy gases that burn your nose, it's past the point. It still works for catfish, which are more tolerant of advanced decomposition, but it loses effectiveness for bass and tilapia. Storage. In the refrigerator once prepared, it lasts up to 10 days while maintaining its quality. In the freezer, it lasts up to 2 months. Thaw the day before fishing, leaving it at room temperature for 4 hours. Do not thaw in hot water. Do not use a microwave. Excessive heat kills active bacteria and reduces volatile compounds that are key to its effectiveness. Total cost of this setup: between $2 and $53 at most. That's less than a single pack of scented rubber artificial bait that fishing stores sell as a miracle solution. Want to enhance it even further? There are 3 additions that old fishermen on the shores used depending on the target they were seeking. A tablespoon of pure vanilla extract, not artificial confectionery essence. It has to be real extract. Vanilla adds vanillin to the mixture, a phenolic compound that largemouth bass respond to very well, especially in warmer water above 25 degrees Celsius. A pinch of curry powder, half a teaspoon. The essential oils of curry contain sulfurous compounds such as dimethyl sulfide and dimethyl disulfide, the same compounds that dead crustaceans and mollusks release. Catfish detect this from seemingly impossible distances. It's almost unfair to use it. And half a teaspoon of cinnamon powder, not sticks, powder. Cinnamon contains eugenol, a volatile phenol that studies from the University of Florida and universities in the southern United States have identified as a proven attractant for various freshwater species. Cinnamon also has moderate antibacterial properties that help control fermentation and prevent it from going too far. With these 3 additions, the bait will cover the fish's 3 main sensory channels simultaneously. Smell, through the mixture of organic acids and volatile compounds from fermentation and extras. Taste, when the fish bites the grain and experiences a chemical profile completely different from any artificial bait. And the lateral line, through the microperturbation of gas bubbles that continue to be produced even when the corn is already at the bottom waiting. Now, you're starting to understand why the fishing industry never taught you this. You understand why there are no tutorials on fermented corn on the channel of any company that sells artificial bait. The sport fishing industry in the United States moves more than $48 billion a year. A large part of that money comes from synthetic spray attractants. Those little bottles that cost between $6 and $12 smell like dead fish processed in a laboratory and try to chemically imitate what natural fermentation does for free in 72 hours. They sell the result of the process in the form of a packaged product, labeled, advertised, and distributed on the shelves of specialized stores. If every shore fisherman knew that they could achieve the same result, or better, with a supermarket can and patience, those shelves would be full of unsold product. That's why nobody teaches you this. It's against their business. But the FWC's restriction in certain areas of Florida says it all. When fisheries management authorities need to regulate a technique because it's too effective, you know you've arrived at something real. It's not marketing. It's not fishermen's exaggeration embellishing the story. It's official state regulation. When fishing in the field, technique is just as important as preparation. Arrive at the fishing spot at least 30 to 40 minutes before setting up your rod. This is non-negotiable if you want results. Take 4 to 6 tablespoons of the fermented corn with the liquid and spread it in a natural fan shape at the spot where you want to fish. The ideal area, where the bottom begins to slope down from the bank, between 1 and 3 meters deep. In a weak current, Cast slightly above the fishing spot and let the current carry it. Having done that, he steps back from the edge. He doesn't step heavily. He doesn't make a sound. The vibration of the human footstep on the bank is detectable by the lateral line of the fish that are already approaching, and scares away the larger ones, which are always the most cautious. He sits or stands still, quiet, for at least 20 minutes before throwing anything. This time allows the chemical signal to diffuse and reach where the fish are resting or patrolling. When casting his line, he uses 3 to 5 grains of fermented corn on the hook. Not just one. The reason is simple. Multiple grains increase the surface area in contact with the water, releasing more compounds around the hook. It also makes the hook heavier and presents a bite size that corresponds to what the fish is finding on the bottom. It has already eaten several scattered grains, and the hook with the same quantity doesn't seem any different. Recharge the point with another portion of ground bait every 45 minutes to an hour, depending on activity. If you're hooking fish frequently, you don't need to recharge so soon. The point is active. If 45 minutes have passed without action, recharging revitalizes the signal. Best times: first rays of sunlight, between 6 and 8 in the morning. Late afternoon, between 4 and 6 o'clock. During these intervals, the surface water temperature is dropping after the heat of the day or is still cool from the night. The fish approach the shore to feed, and the concentration of corn compounds in the water layer near the bottom is at its peak due to the higher density of organic acids compared to water. For largemouth bass, place the hook with corn about 40 centimeters from the bottom, using a small Carolina rig weight or a split sinker on the line to keep the grain close to the substrate without sinking into the mud. The bass will sniff out the spot, search the bottom, and take the bait with less hesitation than any artificial lure. For blue tilapia and Nile tilapia, directly on the bottom, in the mud. Tilapia search the substrate with their mouths, turning it over, sniffing. The corn needs to be settled. For channel catfish and brown catfish, place the hook on the bottom and a little further from the central point of the ground bait, about 5 to 8 meters above. The catfish follows the scent trail like a bloodhound, coming slowly but with determination. The slightly distant hook mimics the behavior of a lure that has moved slightly from the main concentration, exactly what it is looking for at the edges of the feeding spot. Avoid using it in strong currents without adjusting the quantity. In fast-flowing rivers, the ground bait disperses before concentrating its signal. In these cases, double the initial quantity, 8 to 10 tablespoons, and cast it further upstream from the target point, letting the current work in your favor and carry the scent to where the fish are positioned behind submerged structures, rocks, logs, or folds in the bottom. A common mistake: not waiting the necessary time after arriving at the spot. Most anglers arrive, throw the ground bait, and immediately cast their line. The result? They are fishing while scaring away the fish they should be attracting. Patience is part of the technique. The initial 20 to 30 minutes of waiting are not a waste of time. They are an investment in the results of the next 3 hours. Another mistake: using overly fermented, past-ripened corn. It seems contradictory, but corn that is too decomposed loses its lighter, volatile compounds, precisely those that travel far in the water and reach the fish first. What remains are the heavy, acidic compounds that attract catfish but repel bass and tilapia. Smell it before using. If the smell makes your eyes water, it's past its prime for general fishing. Reserve it exclusively for catfish. And remember, if you want the complete knowledge, the system behind where the fish are, why they're there, and how to reach them without relying on luck, it's all in the ebook High-Level Fishing, The Water Game. There you'll learn water reading, identifying productive zones in seconds, structure and positioning, where the fish really are, and how to reach them from the bank. Current and flow control. How to use the force of the water to bring the fish to you, not chase after it. Behavioral patterns. Predicting movements before casting your line. And the mindset that separates those who fish well from those who just show up on the water and try their luck. The link is in the first pinned comment. It's the knowledge they tried to bury, now in your hands. Think about your next fishing trip in Florida. While the guy next to you spends $15, $20 on scented rubber lures that he'll lose on the first bottom branch or lose the line with the first big base, you arrive with a $2.50 bucket, calmly set up your spot. Sit, wait, and 40 minutes later, you're hooking your first fish. In 4 hours, you'll have more money in your tackle box than he'll have in a whole month. Your friends will ask you the secret. You decide whether to tell them or keep it to yourself. The industry wants to convince you that good fishing is expensive, that you need the right rod, the right line, the right bait, the right store. But a bucket of corn fermented for 72 hours, costing $3, beats any artificial bait kit they sold this week. The old fishermen on the banks of Florida's rivers and lakes knew this. They were restricted in certain areas because it worked too well. Now you know too. What will change in your next shore fishing trip? Comment below and subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next video. Because what's coming will make this technique seem basic.